Looking for real stories that lift you up? Welcome to Inspire and Impact, the podcast where purpose meets perseverance. This is where transformation begins and your story continues.
Welcome to the Inspire and Impact podcast show. I'm your host, Daniel Rosenstein. Today I have the honor of interviewing Matt Kutz. Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Daniel. Really appreciate it.
Can you share with the audience a little bit about yourself, your background, what is it you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a professor is my day job, a university professor. I'm a teacher at Florida International University in a doctoral program there for athletic trainers, sports medicine professionals. Primarily my background, I've been in higher ed for, about 26 years now. So teaching for a little bit and written several books, all the typical academic stuff that nobody thinks to get so excited about. Journal editor, committee chair, all that fun stuff. But I have been very fortunate to serve on some fantastic organizations and capacities. World Federation of Athletic Training and Therapy, for example, vice president for them, and get to do a lot of international travel and things. A faculty member who gets to do a lot of that fun stuff.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for sharing. Now, that being that you've been in the academic arena your whole time, what challenges have you been through as in academia that it's been?
Yeah, academia has its own set of frustrations that a lot of people, they talk about if you can't do teach kind of a thing. And that might be true. I don't necessarily disagree with that because I know a lot of faculty members who are like, how did you get here? But that's another story for a different day. The big challenge, of course, is trying to impress your peers because tenure is an incredibly difficult process to go through because it's incredibly scrutinizing and things like that. So it's very tough to overcome that mindset. And I know a lot of people over the 30 years or so that I've been in this who didn't cut it. They had the credentials, but because of the scrutiny, because of the level of research and things like that's required, a lot of people think it's mostly about mostly about teaching, but it's really probably half and half. It's teaching and research. And so research and gaining that reputation are difficult things. And then you have, of course, everyday life that gets in the way of anybody's career and job that makes it challenging.
You're definitely right. I think a lot of people who are outside of academia just think, you're just spending a lot of time teaching, then realize you're also doing spend writing, publishing, and dealing with all those, I don't really call it back end or behind the scenes stuff that people outside of academia probably are not aware of.
Yeah, there's a lot of behind the scenes, there's an old adage, publish or perish kind of a thing. And, there's definitely a lot of truth to that. And I think a lot of faculty are surprised when they get into the role that they finally land a faculty position or whatever, and they realize that it's not just all teaching. Teaching is a big part of it, of course, but it's not all teaching. And there's other skill sets required there, researching and writing. And even those are different things. Technical writing versus creative writing and journals and stuff like that can be challenging. And then, like I said, then you add every day into it like everybody else. And it's as stressful a job as anybody else would have. And that's not always recognized.
How is everybody's talking about AI. How has AI shifted your world in academia? Like you're talking about, with publishing and writing. A lot of people are using AI now to write and, to write articles and stuff like that. How does your world deal with the AI, instead of using a human writer, you have AI doing the writing?
Right. Yeah, no, that's huge. And actually, believe it or not, this weekend, I was at a workshop on AI in education, and it is most definitely a game changer, and the closest thing that people can think of is back, I don't know that I'll have the dates exactly right, but I think it was somewhere around the 70s when Texas Instrument first launched the first portable calculator. And, math departments all over the country were like, why do you need us for now? Kind of a thing. And of course, the calculator we adjusted to that very quickly, but they actually wanted to outlaw calculators, the mathematics faculty and things like that. And people are projecting a similar thing with this AI. Listen, it's here. It's not going away. And you can either just stick your head in the dirt and ignore it, or you can deal with it. And so it's a major game changer. I know for me and my students, I actually encourage the use of AI, but I also regrade in a different way now because creativity is still required. It's just required on the front end instead of the back end. We know, because how you prompt a large language model, ChatGPT or other large language models that help with that. But it's a game changer. They're better at emails now. They're better papers. They're more technically correct. You've got to evaluate some other things on the professional publishing side of things. Like as a journal, I also serve as a journal editor. And one of the things that we're encountering is not just our authors using AI to help edit, which is a good thing, and all of us have used AI all along. I mean, the first time you use an email and that little red underline shows up, it tells you to type the letter, and that's AI. We've been using AI all along to make our writing better. Imagine if we didn't have that, how many misspellings we would have everywhere, right? So Grammarly helps us with that. So we're using AI way more than we even realize we are. This is just obviously a step further. And even on the reviewer side, peer reviewers for journals can easily throw in an abstract or something into a thing and say, hey, what's wrong with this abstract? Find the errors. And they act like they did the review and they didn't. To me, that's more of the ethical concern there, is how it's being used to edit, critique, evaluate, and then people taking credit for evaluating and critiquing that. So it actually is on both sides of the equation. And I guess the short story is it has to be embraced, but we also have to rethink how we're going to use, how we're going to evaluate, how we're going to score, how we're going to grade, things like that, so that students are still incentivized to do the work we need them to do.
Now, you shared with me before, the podcast about other challenges you were facing in the past, including being diagnosed with prostate cancer. Can you kind of walk us through that time that, you received the diagnosis? How did that news change your life? Obviously, that's very big news.
Yeah, that's a good question. Being in the sports medicine space and teaching, like I was saying, I've always been an active person. So I was one of these people who was diagnosed with prostate cancer and didn't have any symptoms whatsoever. Or if I did, they were very minor and I wasn't even aware they were prostate related issues. And basically I was training for a triathlon, crashed my bike on a training ride, broke my hand in that crash. And it was during that visit with my primary care physician, who was just checking my hand, who happened to notice in my medical chart that I hadn't come in for my, the 50-year-old checkup, so to speak, all the things, the colonoscopy, the blood work, all that kind of stuff that the guys don't like to talk about. And so we did that. And that's when they found it, just on a routine check like that. I was sitting at home and his nurse called me a few days later and said, hey, we got your results back, your lab work back, and your PSA, which stands for prostate specific antigen test, came back really high. I think you should see a specialist, a urologist. So I did. And that's when I was diagnosed. And, you mentioned that's earth-shattering news to anybody, when you get the big C word, cancer and all that kind of stuff. And the thing in my particular story is my doctors and I had a great team of physicians who were like, don't worry, this, if you're going to get cancer, this is the best kind of cancer to get. It's very curable, very treatable. So I was under the impression that we were going to be okay. And I still am going to be okay. But initially we were like, okay, this is going to be good. As things unfolded, and I'll save you all the gory details, but as things unfolded, it turns out that the cancer that I had already metastasized. So it was already spreading. We found some in my pelvis. We found some in my lymph nodes in my groin. So that's now all of a sudden becomes very very urgent. So we moved a lot of the treatment schedule up, including a radical prostatectomy, which is a pretty dramatic surgery to remove the prostate, as well as an aggressive course of radiation, which was 40 days long. And so that's a real mind bender. And, you struggle with things and you wrestle with things. And of course you ask all the questions, why me? What did I do to deserve this? Am I going to, all the questions that are normal to go through. And you really have to take stock and inventory of who you are, what you believe, why, come to terms with your relationships and with, kids and spouses and partners and friends and all those kinds of things. That it really is a dramatic wake up call. And in my case, it really derailed some of my career because one of the other things I do quite a bit of is public speaking. And I had several public speaking engagements that I had to cancel because of the radiation treatments, which is something you can't miss, right? And so we did that. And one of the things that I decided to do, and this was just me, is I was going to write 1,000 words every day for 40 days. And my initial plan with that was for it to be a journal, a catharsis, just to get out my feelings, emotions, and things like that, just as a way to stay healthy and mentally. And so what ended up happening is about day 3 of that, I started writing about this concept that I call the epic life and living an epic life. Of course, when you're battling with these kind of feelings and diagnosis, you start thinking about your legacy and the quality of the life that you've lived and what's left and how you want to live it. So I started writing about what I call the epic mindset, or being an epic leader. And EPIC is a mnemonic device or an acronym for excellent, perspective, inspiration or inspired, and compassion. And you break down what I call, those are the 4 epic maxims, or the maxims of an epic leader. They are striving to always demonstrate excellence. And then I uncover what is excellence, what prevents someone from pursuing excellence, how excellence is not the same as perfection. And I really deal a lot with the perfectionism versus excellence. I am of the mind that no one can be perfect, but everyone can be excellent. And there's a difference between being perfect and being excellent. Pursuing excellent is a much more reasonable and realistic goal. Then we talk about perception, or learning how to perceive your surroundings, learning how to perceive what you're feeling and how to articulate what other people are emoting and feeling, and developing the skills of perception. Now, I teach that through the lens of what I call 3D thinking. 3D thinking is the application of hindsight, insight, and foresight. So the 3 dimensions of time, past, present, and future. And that's how we develop being perceptive. Then we have to talk about the being inspired and inspiring others. I believe a truly epic person or an epic leader knows how to inspire themselves when external things aren't there to inspire them. What do you do when you are feeling down? How do you stir up your heart? How do you stir up your soul, your spirit, so to speak, to be inspired? So we talk about what inspiration is and looks like. And then finally, we talk about compassion and learning how to practice compassion, both for other people and for yourself. And the interesting takeaway that I learned there was this idea of compassion. Of course, is a compound word made up of 2 Latin words, cum and passio, which is with pain and suffering. And that's what compassion means. And when you really unpack that and learn how to apply that, it really means a person who lives a life of compassion has embraced the pain and suffering that is brought their way, not as an end in of itself, but understanding that pain and suffering, the disruption in your life, so to speak, is actually there to make you better. And so that's what it means to be epic. And I wrote that literally in the 40 days of my radiation. And when I was done, I told my wife, I said, man, honey, I really think I wrote the book I always wanted to write here. And it just was supposed to be a journal. And so I pitched it to some publishers, and it's going to come out in the end of August, 2025.
Did you find doing all that journaling, did it really help you get over, that tough time that you were going through?
It really did. It really did. And actually, another book came out of that same experience, and a book called Diagnosed, which is my memoir, so to speak, my journal on what I was feeling, the emotions, the side effects of the medication. Because, Daniel, one of the hardest things is, the cancer itself is difficult, but the medications that they put you on to deal with the cancer are horrible. I mean, they're just absolutely horrible. Most of my problems were side effects from the medication. Like I said, I didn't have any symptoms to begin with, so I didn't even know I had it. And I was still active and writing and training and running and doing all the things. And if it wasn't for the medications, I wonder if I still would never even have known. But dealing with that was hard. And that journaling and that writing, which I still do, has been incredibly helpful for me.
I mean, aside from like the drilling, was there anything else did you do to maintain your mindset, your focus during, that journey?
That's a great question, because I suppose everybody handles it and deals with it differently. In my case, I leaned into my relationships, and, I'm very fortunate and blessed to have a tremendous support system around me. And I know not everybody with these types of diagnoses are, and that's unfortunate, and I feel for them. But in my case, I really had to learn to be vulnerable, and that's the hard thing, because, I know it's stereotypical, but a lot of men, they don't like to talk about their feelings and their emotions and all that kind of stuff. And I'm the same way, and I don't wear them on my sleeve necessarily. So I had to really learn to do that with the help of, the people around me, my support system, my physicians in particular, and my wife especially, helped me learn how to communicate what I was feeling, because otherwise I would have just kept it down. And the writing helped with that. A lot of times I joke and say, I don't really know what I'm thinking until I write it out, and as I write it out, it's almost like a conversation I'm having with a friend. And then as I write things out, I begin to realize, oh, this is what I think, this is what I feel, this is what I mean. And then, going on, having those conversations. In my case, I started walking. I couldn't run because of the surgeries and the things and the scarring and the radiation, which just literally sucks the life out of you, literally. I couldn't run like I used to run and things like that. So I had to settle for walking. That's discouraging at first, but then you also appreciate it. And so I would walk. My wife would then join me, which she never came on runs with me, but now we're walking. So she joined me, and those conversations and really helped quite a bit. So yeah, I would say another thing that's really advantageous is learning to be vulnerable. And now I don't know, for some people that's easier said than done. In my case, it was difficult, but I had to learn to do that and to trust the people around me. And so I think that was very helpful.
I mean, you often talk about finding strength in adversity. Like, what advice can you give to people that are going through a major life challenge right now?
Yeah. So I also think that's a great question. So in my case, I wrote actually an acronym for myself, not only the EPIC, but an acronym for battle, I call it. And I actually made some t-shirts, and I put it on t-shirts just for me, just so I would learn how to do it. And what was really interesting is this idea of battle. Battles was an acronym, again, for be brave, and then different things I did. And if you want me to go through each one, I can definitely go through each one for you.
Yeah. What does it really mean?
So battle. So B was be brave. You have to embrace the, bravery. A is armor up. So put your armor on, and that could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. For me, it meant guard my mind, armor up, don't not put a wall between you, but protect your thoughts. Because one of the things that can happen with a diagnosis like this, or any adversity, whether it's financial ruin, divorce, relation, any adversity like that of any kind, you start having the negative thoughts very easily come in. So you've got to armor up. You got to protect yourself and defend yourself against those thoughts. Then trust your team is the first T. And of course, everybody's team is different. In my case, the team that I was talking about was my close circle of family and friends, and then my healthcare providers. And because, listen, I mean, I'm sure you know this, and I know anybody who's been through something like this knows this, but everybody's got advice on how to handle cancer. I mean, everybody's got something to say about it, how to do it, how to fix it, this kind of thing. And it spans the spectrum. So you've got to trust your team. Once you have your team established, you've got to trust that team. And then the second T is triumph over fear. And that's, again, another big mental battle is you have to, and I'm very careful with this one because I'm not saying don't be afraid, but you've got to triumph over it. In my case, I was scared, and there are times even still, my wife and I had a conversation 2 or 3 days ago where we both were like, I'm still a little scared. I'm doing better and I'm doing well. And my doctors are very pleased with how my treatments are going. But that doesn't mean that those thoughts of what if still don't creep in from time to time. So you never want to be in denial about your fear. You want to recognize it and then triumph over it and say, no, I'm not going to let that thought defeat me today. Then the L is lean into your faith or whatever that is. Lean into your belief system, lean into your values. That's really important. In my case, I have a Christian background. And so I'm leaning into that, I'm understanding, more about my faith than I ever have before, and so that's important. And then finally, the E in battle is engage in life. And what I mean by that is don't stop living. Don't stop doing what you do. You still have to find joy in the normal things of taking out the trash and mowing the lawn and vacuuming the pool and all the different, whatever jobs it is that you do. We can't use this as an excuse not to, go for walks, take your family out, babysit the grandkids, all the things that life entails. You still have to do that. So again, be brave, armor up, trust your team, triumph over fear, lean into your faith and engage in life. And if you can do those 6 things, I think you're well on your way to helping you handle the adversity that life throws your way.
What was some the biggest lessons that you learned that through this journey of, being diagnosed with cancer and dealing with the healing?
Yeah. What comes to mind right away? Because that's a great question. And, my wife even asks me that all the time. And sometimes I'm like, nothing, honey, because I'm just nothing. I've learned nothing other than life stakes, kind of a thing. But then other times when I'm more introspective and aware, I alluded to it a little bit already, and that's how dependent I am on other people, because you like to think you're independent. You like to think you can do it your own. I'll remember one of the biggest fights my wife and I had after the diagnosis was lawn care, because I'm that guy in the neighborhood who's, I want everybody who walks by to say, oh, he's got the nice lawn, or my lawn needs to look like his, or whatever. I wanted to be that guy. So for years, I was very meticulous on mowing it, how my lines in the grass went, edging the trim, all that kind of stuff. That was me. And I took pride in that. And I couldn't do it. After my radiation, especially, I couldn't do it. And it was just even too much to push the lawnmower. So I actually bought a new lawnmower that's self-propelled and all that. And that helped for a little bit. But eventually, as radiation wore on, I got even more and more fatigued and tired. So the big argument was hiring a lawn service to come do my lawn. And I know that might sound silly, but for me, it was a major eye-opener for how dependent I actually am. And if I was alone, I couldn't do what I normally do. I couldn't do life the way I would have expected to do life. And that's a big deal. So coming to that reality about your own limitations was huge. And I mentioned it before too, is understanding how much I tried to hide of anything that I thought made me vulnerable. And I really had to learn that. I can tell you in full disclosure and full truth that my relationship with my wife, my kids, my siblings is all way better now. And I really believe a big part of that is because of the eye-opening experience of realizing these types of things. So those are some big lessons I learned. And I hope, your listeners, won't fight that as well. They'd realize, listen, we are way more dependent on the people around us than we realize we are. And that was a big lesson for me.
You mentioned the word epic. Can you maybe break that down? What does epic really stand for? Explain what does it really mean in everyday life?
Yeah, sure. And that's also a great question. So this idea of becoming epic is something that has been stirring in my mind for a while. And again, a situation like this really forces you to come to terms with it. So for me, pursuing excellence is being consistent, and being persistent. And a lot of times we gauge the quality of our work against someone else's work. And I think that's cheating. And even the subtitle of my book has to do with overcoming mediocrity, because what I believe many people do inadvertently, I'm not saying they're doing it on purpose, they inadvertently settle for mediocrity and just being okay or a little bit above average and right in that space. And how I describe that, or why I believe that, is because we generally determine how good we're doing based on how good or how poor someone else is doing. And my contention is that an excellent person, an excellent leader, an excellent whatever, understands that the only metric of success that I should be using to determine how well I'm doing is my own past performance. And so that's what it means for me to be excellent, is to generate a positive track record of outstanding results based on what you are capable of producing. So that's a big one for me. So that's what it means to be excellent. To be perceptive, the P part of the epic mindset is learning how to see the world as it really is. And I alluded, earlier in our conversation about hindsight, insight, and foresight. And a little bit more depth to that would be how much the average person, and this is statistically speaking, most people default to hindsight as the major source of input for how they're perceiving what's going on around them or what opportunities they should pursue or avoid. And because, think about it, how many times when we encounter something and we go back to our memory banks of what happened last time. Last time I said this, I got in trouble. Last time I did this, it really worked out great. So let's do it again. And I'm not saying hindsight isn't good. In fact, experience can be very valuable. But if we forget that there's two other dimensions that need to be factored into our equation, we're missing a big part of what's supposed to be perceived. So insight has to do with paying attention to the real moment time, the present moment. What's going on right now in the immediate 7 seconds or so. Scientists have discovered that for the normal human mind, the present is about a 7-second plus or minus. 7 seconds in the past and 7 seconds in the future is pretty much what we consider the present or now. And I'm saying to leverage our insight, we need to pay attention much more closely to what's transpiring in those 7 seconds. And then foresight then is our ability to articulate, and this is a major factor here, to articulate what we see the future being. And I say articulate is important because many of us can imagine what we want the future to be, but we don't articulate it. We don't know how to form it into words so that someone else can see it also. And if you can't do that, then I say you're practicing fantasy. And there's a difference between fantasy and foresight. The difference, of course, being someone who's operating foresight can actually describe that future so that someone else can see it. So that's where I think perception is. And so when you've got hindsight, insight, and foresight all firing, you become amazingly more aware of what's going on around you, how what has happened to you has helped you, and how what you hope happens to you helps and guides you in the decisions that you're making right now in real time to get to that place. So that's huge. So that's what it means to be perceptive. And then being inspired is something else entirely. And that's a twofold piece here, because the first part of being inspired is knowing how to stir up your own creativity and your own innovation when you're not feeling inspired. And there's a way you can do that. There's, people talk about mindfulness, meditation, prayer, all these different kinds of things, and all of those can work. My point is you have to determine what it is that sparks your interest and not become so dependent on external input. The AI question you asked me earlier, a big part of The MIT actually just came out with a study. I actually cited it in this presentation I was telling you about last weekend, where people who operate in AI have actually a significant lower creativity index after they've used it. So it's like a pre-test and post-test. So they had a certain amount of creativity before they used AI for an extended period of time, and then they took the creativity index test again, and it was lower the second time than the first time. So they're speculating that by the use of ChatGPT or other large language models, you're actually losing some of that creative input, which is why we've got to learn how to inspire ourselves, because people are not going to stop using AI. So we've got to learn how to spark that again. And so that's what it means for on one side. The other side of that coin is you have to do things in such a way that inspires other people. That's what I'm hoping to do with this podcast, my writing, the blogs, my Substack page, all the different things, my LinkedIn profiles, all those kinds of things. I'm hoping people will find that my journey and my life and my story is inspiring so that they can believe they can do it too. And I say that because one of the things that happened early on in my diagnosis is my wife and I began to look for support groups. We began to look for people who had similar stories and success stories, right? Because the first thing that you do in your mind is when you hear you have cancer is you think of all the people who who have had a good attitude, but then also still died, or had a very hard time with it. And, I wanted good stories and healthy stories and happy stories. And there's not a lot of them, but they're out there. And so you've got to learn that. And I hope that what I'm doing can be one of those good stories for a lot of people. And then finally, compassion. And again, going back to the two words there, calm and passion. And, we use the word passion incorrectly in Western language quite a bit, because we think of passion. When we hear the word passion, we think of that means doing something exciting, doing something you love, doing something that makes you happy. And that's really the exact opposite of what it is, because we use the phrase, the passion of the Christ, for example, and that was pain and suffering, crucifixion, and it's the same for us. When we talk about engaging in our passion, that really means engaging in something that you value so much, you're willing to suffer for it. And we don't think of passion that way. When we think of, even in terms of organizational success or living your dream or your best life or whatever it is, we think passion is those kinds of things. But really, those things that are your best life, those things that give you meaning and purpose, those are the things that we're willing to suffer for. And that's really what passion is. So you need to carry that with you. And so calm, the calm part, the prefix of that means to walk alongside with or to be a part of. And so we need to understand that to truly live a life of compassion, we need to understand that the pain that we're walking with isn't to be ignored. The pain that we're walking with is actually there to make us better. Like I said, my relationships are better. I communicate with more vulnerability and clarity now. And I can say that it's the pain that I've been walking with, the disappointment that I've been walking with, that has helped me to do that. And that's what it means to be or to demonstrate compassion. And then, of course, the other side of that is other people. When you see or experience or meet other people who are going through something traumatic, then you also can identify with that much more easily and quickly, which is very helpful.
I mean, a lot of times you talk about like chaos is the package, that you potentially arrive in. Can you kind of elaborate? What does that mean?
Yeah. So that's a favorite phrase of mine. And I actually wrote it in this epic book as well as some other articles, but it's chaos is the package that your potential arrives in. And so chaos, the disruption, the uncertainty, the turmoil of life is what I'm talking about there. And when that shows up, I have learned, and I didn't always do this because it's not easy to do it so much, especially younger people. When chaos, disruption, uncertainty, change, when that shows up, most of the time we try to avoid that. We try to move away from that. We try to change it so it's not there. And that doesn't work because then something else happens. And so The real strategy of life is not learning to avoid chaos. The real strategy of life is learning to leverage it for your advantage. And that's what I mean by chaos is the package that your potential arrives in, is how are the chaotic things that are going on in your life, the adversity, the pain, like I said, financial ruin, terminal diagnosis, a divorce, whatever, a tragic loss of a family member, something like that. When something like that happens, never ignore it, never deny it, and never deny that it causes fear and pain. But we have to look at it as a way to grow. And that's what I mean by chaos is the package that your potential arrives in. So I have learned over time now that every time something chaotic or unexpected, unpleasant happens to me, I begin to look at that as an indication that I need to improve in a certain area, or I need to change my thinking in a certain area. And that way I try to, for the old cliche that it is, turn lemons into lemonade,
I mean, in your opinion, what's the difference between fragility, resilience, anti-fragility in the context of like personal development?
Yeah. So another great question. So I'm a big fan of the concept of antifragility, which is a notion set about by Nicholas Taleb several years ago in his book, Antifragile. And for me, the concept of being resilient is talked about a lot, right? And something that is resilient simply means that it returns back to the state it was. For example, in my own cancer journey, my wife and I, if we've said it once, we've said it a million times. I just wish things were the way they were. And that's resilient. And if things did get back to the way they were, we'd have been looked at and embraced as, oh, look at that resilient couple, that resilient family, whatever. And that's what that means. But I actually think there's something better than being resilient, and that's anti-fragile. So before we talk about that, of course, we know that something that's fragile is easily broken when it's handled, right? And you've got to be very careful. We say things like, you got to treat it with kid gloves, kind of thing. And that's what it means to be fragile. If you get poked or prodded a little bit, you're going to break. Anti-fragile is the opposite of that. It's that if you're poked and prodded a little bit, not only don't you break, but you actually get stronger. And it's the whole idea. I mean, it's a natural phenomenon because our human body does that. And that's what exercise is. When I go to lift weights in the weight room or I go on a run for my cardio, I mean, I'm actually putting stress on my cardiac muscles. I'm putting stress on my heart. If I'm lifting weights, I'm actually damaging the muscle fibers in my muscle and destroying them. And then it's in the rest period that those fibers and cells regenerate themselves stronger than what they were before I tried the weightlifting. And that's what anti-fragility is. It's taking that principle and applying it to life. And when something tragic or, again, chaotic happens to you, you shouldn't treat it as, or the goal doesn't need to be just to get back to the way it was. Of course, you want that, but also you want to go one step beyond that and say, not only am I going to get back to the way I was, but whatever this thing is that's disrupting me right now, I'm going to use it to make me better and stronger than I was before. And that's what it means to be anti-fragile. And cancer is certainly one of those things that will either destroy you emotionally and mentally, or it can actually help you refine your focus to the state and the point that you now know what's important, how to spend your time, what to spend your time doing, and then where you can have the most value. So I look at that as a way to improve.
Now you've been through this whole journey. How does it change the view, the way you see success now versus how you saw success, many years ago?
Yeah. So that's also a fantastic question because, and that kind of bears out. And even when we were talking about excellence, because I was that guy who rated my success on other people. I would look at, what someone else is doing, and I would try to do just a little bit better than that, just so I could say, hey, I'm not the best, but I'm not the worst. And my job was my mindset was always to be just a little bit better than a person to the lower third of the ladder, so to speak. But because of that, I was never really pursuing my best. I was never really trying to be excellent. I was just always trying to be a little bit better than the other guy. And this journey in particular has really brought that to my mind and to my attention to where, wait a second, I can't, that's not right for you. If I truly want to be an impact, if I truly want to make a difference, if I truly want to be the man that I believe I'm supposed to be, I can't think of that way. So it helped me redefine my concept of success. And that's in using my own self as the standard, or even a higher standard, whether that be a person, who is so much better than you, to try to aspire to be better. So that's how I think it's helped me. And it makes it easier to say no to things, because once you know who you are and where you're going and what your value is and how to truly be excellent, then you know what distracts you from that. So it actually has helped me become more excellent, have more initiative, so to speak, in a positive way, and create more and generate more and things like that. So it's actually been quite a incredible learning curve.
So like in your sports medicine career, you've worked with like elite athletes, educators, executives. What continues to inspire you to keep helping other people perform at their best?
It's the fact that I believe so many people do settle for that mediocrity, whether it's athletes, coaches, whoever it might be, corporate athletes, the whole idea of the organizational athlete, so often we think we've reached our best. We think we've done the best that we can do. And from having worked with athletes my whole life and been shocked at what I thought was the pinnacle of human performance, someone else, does it and does it better and does it faster and is stronger. And to me, that just speaks of the infinite potential of the human capacity, or I said that backwards, sorry, the infinite capacity of human potential. And so because of that, that keeps me motivated to keep going, because I know that no matter how well you think you're performing, you can do better. And so my job, and I hope that what I'm able to do with people, is get them to realize and understand that whether you're already viewing yourself as a very top performer or whether you view yourself as a mediocre performer, you can still get better. And I like the challenge of trying to find what it is that can make you better.
I mean, since you are a professor of global leadership, like what trends or shifts you see shaping the future of leadership? Like, how's it really changing?
Yeah. So back to what we talked about earlier, AI is a major trend right now that's changing and shifting even the concept of what leaders can do and who leaders are. And just for example, I know in my own scholarship and my own writing and research, I spent a lot of time distinguishing between management and leadership. Now, I don't want to get too boring for you here or crazy, but what's interesting about that is what traditionally has kept managers in the realm of management and prevented them from being the inspirational, motivational leader that people like to have is how they use their language, right? And how they project and convey information. Now that AI is doing that for them, an average communicator who can become a great communicator, or I won't say great, can become a better communicator. So it's actually upping the game of some of these managers who normally might have only met such a certain criteria and not been promoted much higher. But now, since somebody else is writing their emails for them, now that someone else is writing the speech together for them, all of a sudden they can be polite when they don't mean to be polite. I mean, I know a guy, and he just confesses to me just last weekend. I write my email the way I wanted to write it, and I'd be you SOB and you're a jerk and failed performance, blah blah blah. And then I'll take my email, I put it in ChatGPT, and I'll say the exact same things, but make it sound nicer. And it regenerates the email, and that's the one he sends. And so, that's a game changer, for leaders. So that's a major trend that I think is going that way. The other trend is what I call, other people might call it different, but what I call is grassroots leadership. And what I mean by that is there's many organizations that are now putting more value and more stock and more training and energy into existing staff members or existing team members to develop as leaders as opposed to bring in external leaders. We're finding that more and more organizations want their leaders to come from within as opposed to bringing in from the outside. And I think that's a big shift because it will help organizations maintain their message, stay on point, and other things a lot more.
I mean, you've done a lot of things. What's been like your proudest moment as a professional so far?
Oh, wow. I don't know that I can answer that question. That's a great question. Wow. I remember being absolutely thrilled when I received a Fulbright scholarship. One of my lifelong ambitions and dreams was to be a Fulbright scholar and to travel, abroad and to teach and do research abroad. And being able to do that was a huge feather in my cap that opened up a lot of other doors for me, including visiting faculty positions at different universities around the world, which has been something I'm incredibly proud of.
You're like a really busy guy. Like you said, you're a professor, you're a dad, you're a husband, a thought leader. How do you balance all those different roles since you do, so many things?
One, have an amazing partner, but two, incredible time management. You've got to be disciplined. And I'm fortunate, have always been able to be disciplined when it comes to that. It's amazing what we can be disciplined in and what we can't. If you saw my eating habits, my wife rolls her eyes, kind of was like, how come you can do all this stuff? You're so disciplined in this, but you can't not say no to that cheesecake, I don't know, honey. You got to give up somewhere, I guess. But yeah, a big part of that is, of course, time management. But I think this is the real secret. And I mean this with all of my heart is you've got to know what type of impact you want to make and where you want to make it. And I think so many people can't answer that question and they don't know that. So everything that comes along, they try to do, when you ask them, what is your focus on leadership or who can you help? Who's your target? And I like everybody, or anybody. Anybody who will pay me to talk to them, so to speak. And that can really be distracting. So one way to be incredibly effective and impactful is to know who it is you're trying to connect with and how you can do that. And because a lot of people will try so many different things. Like in my case, do you write books? Do you write blogs? Do you go on a public speaking circuit? What do I spend my time developing? And not everybody can do all of those things. So you've got to pick, what's my strength? What am I best at? Where can I glow the most? And what opportunities are being presented to me? And if you can just address those issues, I actually think it can help focus you quite a bit.
So when, as you mentioned, like sometimes life, there's ups and downs. When you feel kind of stuck or overwhelmed, what tools or like mindset shifts do you use to regain clarity?
Yeah. So for me, I do two things, and this is just personal. And I understand not everybody will resonate with this, but I write. One of the things I do is write. And I used to have a legal pad and generally just get my thoughts out and try to think. Now I carry around a little dictaphone and I just speak into it and it helps me transcribe things later. But a big part of that is the writing process. It helps recenter me when I feel confused, when I'm busy and hectic. I just, I'm just going to sit down and just going to start to write some things, and it helps bring me back into focus. Because like I said earlier in our interview, I said, sometimes I don't even know what I'm thinking until I'm able to sit down and write it out to see what that is. So that's the one thing I do. The other thing I do is I'm a huge fan of spiritual practices. So for one, like prayer and meditation is very important for me. And I try to start each day with that and even throughout the day. And that helps me stay focused and centered.
Let's talk about the book that, Becoming Epic. What do you hope readers get out of it?
What I want to happen, Daniel, is I would love for the reader to get that, to read it, and then say to themselves or realize along the way, hey, I can do this too. I can be excellent. I can be perceptive. I can be inspired. I can show compassion. And I really want them to read it and realize that it is not an impossible dream. It is not for the elite. It is not for the super educated, super focused, super successful person, but for the everyday person can read that and say, oh yeah, I can do this. I hope I made it very simple. The book is pretty detailed in terms of here's what excellence is. Here's what keeps you from being epic, the obstacles. Here's things and strategies you can do. And there's questions and you can ask yourself. So I really would like someone to be able to read it and say, hey, oh, I can do this. And that's really what I'm after. For example, you don't have to get a PhD to be epic. You don't have to have $1 million salary to be epic. You don't have to, live on the beach in Maui to be epic. You can be an everyday person and still be epic. And that's what I want people to see.
How do you personally invest in your own leadership and development?
So I'm an avid
classes, just read a lot of books, or
yeah. So I'm an avid reader. I have two things that I do intentionally. One is I read a lot. So yeah, I do a lot of reading, and that helps quite a bit. And just the ideas, and one of the reasons why I also have to write as much as I do, because as much as I read, and I know people who read 4 or 5 books a week. I'm not that. I read a book and a half every 2 weeks, so to speak. So I'm about 1 book a week or something like that. So I'm not reading an insane amount. I also read a lot of journal articles. There's a lot. That's the academic side of me. That a job, I guess, I would call it a perk, but some people call it would be a disadvantage. But they hide a lot of good information in these research journals that people just don't read. I have access to them, obviously, as a professor. So I read that kind of stuff. So I do a lot of reading. The other thing that I do, and I'm very intentional about this, is I try to find people around me who are better than I am and who know more than I know about leadership and have conversations with them. So I'm very intentional about talking with people who I admire, who I respect, who I know are smarter than I am, and ask them and talk to them about what they're reading, what they're thinking, what they're going through, what their ideas are, bouncing my ideas off them. And I find that those two things in particular are very helpful for me.
So what's next for you? Do you have any upcoming projects or goals that you're excited about?
Yeah. So obviously we're real excited about this book launch becoming epic. I alluded earlier on in our conversation too. I actually have a second book that I also just finished called Diagnosed. And the subtitles is It's Not Your Battle to Fight Alone. And so that's a book that I'm really spending a lot of time promoting as well, because that's about my cancer story. And again, another part of adversity. And my wife and I started a nonprofit foundation. We call it the Battle for the Bulge, which is a little tongue-in-cheek kind of thing, just for prostate cancer awareness and education. And so we've started doing things like sponsoring and hosting 5K runs and family walks and things like that. And in that place, we give the book away. We make rounds to physicians and oncologists and educate them on what we're doing and support groups. And again, the book, the 5Ks and things like that. What's next for me is really pushing forward with this Battle for the Bulge Foundation and getting the message of the difficulty of prostate cancer out there, because as I alluded to earlier, most people are under the impression that prostate cancer is an easy cancer. And technically by treatment, and treatment results, it is. But there are some incredibly difficult side effects that happen with prostate cancer treatment, and things that men, quite frankly, are just ashamed to talk about. The 2 big ones being incontinence and sexual dysfunction. And so because of that, I even talked with my local oncologist in the Cancer Research Center here in my local area. They're baffled why men don't show up for prostate cancer screenings and for the support groups and for the research protocols and studies and stuff. And I scratched my head because I'm like, what do you mean you're surprised? I said, men are ashamed. And they're like, what do you mean men are ashamed? They have cancer. I mean, don't they want to help us? Yeah, but they don't want to talk about the fact that the cancer that they have is causing them to be incontinent, so they're wearing adult diapers and they can't control it. And that's humiliating. And then many of them have sexual dysfunction. And that's just, we don't want to talk about that. And they were like, oh my goodness, dude, you have to help us with this. So that's one of the things that we're doing now. My wife and I both together are engaging in these conversations and helping people with understanding while it might not kill you, it does dramatically and negatively affect your life.
So, Matt, if somebody had a question about a conversation, Jay, or they're interested in working with you, what are the best ways they can reach out to you?
Best way is to just go to my website. It's MatthewKutz.com. Kutz is spelled Kutz. So MatthewKutz.com. My email is there. My contact number is there. Access to all my books, even some of my articles and research articles and things are there. So best place to go for the one-stop shop is MatthewKutz.com. You could also reach me through my new foundation website, battleforthebulge.com.
And do you have any final words before we wrap up our conversation for today?
Yeah, I would just like to encourage your listeners not to be discouraged when adversity strikes. And as you alluded to, and I'm so grateful you brought it up, just always remember that chaos is the package that your potential arrives in.
Matt, I really enjoyed our conversation today. I wish we had more time. Podcast is limited.
Yeah.
To about an hour. We kind of have to wrap things up now. But I want to thank you so much for coming on and talking about this important topic. There's a lot of people, they don't feel comfortable talking about this, but you did. You were very brave. And thank you so much for sharing all about your knowledge and expertise and sharing about all of the tools and mindsets and all the hacks that you discovered in your journey and sharing with the audience. I really appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Daniel. I really appreciate it also.